Hello and welcome. This is the Ecomodernist channel live, and today we are honored to speak with Luis Guillamaris. Hope I said that somewhat correctly. I try every time. How's it going, Luis?
Fine, it's going fine. Thank you for the invitation to be here.
Wonderful. I understand you of course are a pro-nuclear activist and engineer. You're part of Replanet. You know a little bit about this microfusion reactor as well as ITER. I've been having this discussion with one of our viewers, of course. I made the mistake and said ITER would have been a quarter to a third of a conventional power plant. And of course, it doesn't have a generator connected, so there's my first mistake. But even so, its 500 megawatt thermal output would not produce much more than 200, 250 megawatts of electricity, and it doesn't even have that connected. So, of course, it would at best be less than an eighth of a conventional nuclear plant. What else do you find interesting about the ITER project, and how can we sort of communicate the facts and figures around it better?
So you just hit the head you just hit the nail on the head. So the problem again is communication. Everything that has nuclear involved has a huge problem with communication. Everything I spoke with a lot of people. So I worked in Fusion for 15 years, and everybody inside of Fusion would say, as sure as 2 plus 2 is 4, ITER is just a lab experiment. So ITER is just, it's not a tabletop experiment, of course, but it's something that will put us in the way of a prototype. And a prototype will come after ITER, and it's going to be called demo. But let's focus on ITER. ITER is, like you said, supposed to have 500 megawatts thermal, but at the end of the day, it's just going to be a simple thermal machine. So it will have like 1/3 efficiency. To be honest, ITER is kind of like the encompassing. So it's going to tackle every aspect of a fusion power plant. So that's why it's a kind of a slow approach. There are still a lot of stuff that we do not know for sure that we would need to have for the future fusion power plant. So let's say that, for instance, the fuel inventory inside of the machine. This is one of the challenges of ITER. So ITER will run on deuterium and tritium, which are isotopes of hydrogen, so very light elements. And you need to optimize the fuel mix at every time. Otherwise, your machine might not be economic. So this is one of the elements that ITER will tackle. So it's in total there are 7 key elements. If you can go to the Eurofusion webpage, you can see one of those. You can see each one of those 7 challenges that ITER will try to tackle simultaneously. For today, for the microfusion part, just as a spoiler, the microfusion and the small fusion projects are not going to be grid scale. They're going to be like the equivalent of fission SMRs. So they're going to be very compact for very niche applications, some of them, but they are going to be something like moonshot approaches. So they're going all in just tackling one of those topics. And if they manage to have a patent, I mean, it's going to be a very lucrative win-win for those teams if they actually manage to patent something that's going to be relevant for the future of fusion.
Wonderful. So this article that you just brought up is about a, quote, baseball-sized fusion reactor. Does that mean that it's a product that someone's going to deliver to market in some fixed amount of time, or is any predictable amount of time? Or is it, as you said, they're taking one of these 7 critical components of the fusion system and uncovering exactly how to solve that one problem?
Or just hoping that the other ones can be brute forced over. So yes, but the one that you're mentioning, so the baseball sized reactor with components off the shelf. So the components off the shelf topic has been a very, very old topic in fusion. So it's like fusion is expensive, and the level of technology you need to go from a fission reactor to a fusion reactor is basically, like I usually say, the same level of technology advancement that you need to go from a matchbox to a fission reactor. So it's kind of sci-fi, but it's very complex with a lot of moving parts machine. So the one that you're mentioning, it's called a fuser. So a fuser is a very classic instrument in studying plasma physics. So usually fusion comes in two main flavors. So either inertial confinement fusion or magnetic confined fusion. So an inertial confined fusion is the one where you use all the big lasers shooting at a small pellet of frozen deuterium and tritium so they can make a small nuclear explosion in the hallway. But the most fusion devices usually use magnetic confinement. So magnets making sure that the plasma does not touch the wall to keep like putting the sun in kind of a special bottle. The fuser, however, it's the one that you're mentioning with components off the shelf to be as cheap as possible, is using electric fields. So it's just using very electrostatic confinement. It's going to try to confine a very small portion of plasma in a very small spot, and it's going to try to extract thermal heat again and try to make it. So I think it's going to be a thermal machine at the end of the day again. So it's actually very cheap to build these devices, and most plasma physics lab actually have one. But to make one at a commercial scale, I think that's the challenge. And to be honest, I'm quite skeptical.
Of course, I'm slightly skeptical myself. So beyond the headlines, this is not something that you suspect will come to market before ITER, or it would be extremely surprising if it did come to market before 2039, let's say.
Okay, so at the end of the day, all we want is a commercial product, right? So
that's what the headlines are that's what the people reading the headlines are predicting. They said, "Oh, fusion, it's here, it's coming any day now." Is that true?
To be honest, I don't quite think so. I mean, ITER is a very solid approach. It's a very sober approach to the challenge, and also demo. But these are very large projects. So the components of the shelf approach for a fuser, maybe I think these teams only want to crack a patent or as much patents as they can. You have to see that accompanying fusion since the early 2000s, you start to see a lot of startups from the very early on. There's probably like almost 100 startups in fusion over time, and you look at the first ones, and it's clearly pseudoscience. So the first startups you start to see they're completely bogus. They're weird, and they basically undermine the path for everybody that came with a serious approach afterward. So there's the challenge of the fusion part, and there's also the challenge for the trying to make it believable part. So the components off the shelf, to be honest, like you said in the article, I am very skeptical, but I like to be optimistic. And the other projects there are a couple of projects in there which I hope we discuss, which I think might have some success.
Wonderful. Why don't you tell us about them?
So there's one on I think it's called Commonwealth Fusion Systems, so the CFS. I actually met some people working there, and they're top-notch physicists and also engineers. And there's this rift in fusion between physicists and engineers, because physicists have actually no interest in commercial applications. They want to publish, otherwise they perish. So there is this, and since it's very expensive activity in research, it's one of the most, if not the most, barring space exploration projects, it's probably one of the most expensive research projects you can have in academia these days. So, and some of these physicists / engineer teams actually went into the private sector. And for instance, the Commonwealth Fusion Systems that I was describing managed to have $1.8 billion in private funding for their project. And they just demonstrated one of the coils. So if anyone here has looked at a tokamak, which is kind of like the bread and butter or the workhorse of fusion research. The other one being the stellarator, which actually is older than the tokamak itself. So these are these coils which are sit vertically, which we call them poloidal coils. So they are these big coils assembled to make the donut of the plasma itself. And they just tested one of these prototype coils for their very compact machine. And the thing is, one thing that ITER has enabled is cheap superconductors. So they developed especially niobium tin alloys and niobium 310 alloys for the coils of ITER. And these coils actually had some kind of S-curve, like most of the things everybody does in research. So these superconductors actually became a little bit cheaper over time, so private entities can start use them as well. And that's what I believe that's what CFS did, so Commonwealth Systems did. So they built a coil which has to be superconductive, so it has to be at very, very cold temperatures. So I'm talking about minus 140 Kelvin. I'm not sure, sorry, minus 140 centigrade. So I'm not sure, sorry for the Fahrenheit people. So it's minus a lot.
Yeah.
And so there's this challenge that they need. So they need to be very cold, and they need to be thermally isolated from one of the hottest places in the solar system, which is the burning plasma, which is in the space of centimeters. So you probably would have one of the highest temperature gradients in the solar system as well. So this is a very complex engineering problem. But the thing is, fusion power scales very nicely with magnetic field, and having a superconductive alloy like the ones I mentioned, so niobium 310 and niobium tin, actually allow very high magnetic fields. So I'm actually very optimistic for this project because they also managed to shield the coils from the neutrons. So they built, so
that's good.
And that's another challenge for ITER. It's to develop materials that actually withstand the neutron flux, which we don't have them yet. So ITER will not have a neutron flux high enough that we will encounter in the commercial grid scale, so utility scale fusion plants. So ITER as another side project, which is the EFMIF. So that's going to be located in Spain. And it will just have a neutron beam to test irradiation from neutrons, because they will encounter neutron fluxes like nothing else. So I hope that, so basically, the Commonwealth fusion system actually looks promising, and the coil just passed some major tests last year, and they're going to start to build their SPARC approach. So a SPARC is the fancy name they called very tight, small tokamaks. So very small. So the SMR equivalent of a fusion device.
I think I found it. I think I found that's the ifmif.org for the fusion project.
Yes,
that's exciting. So this is taking a neutron beam and testing materials in order to make sure that fusion is going to work.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
So the thing with ITER, so ITER it's one of the topics. Like I said, I think they're numbered. I think it's topic number 3. Mm-hmm. So one of the topics is that you will get, so every time an atom is hit by a neutron, it moves along the crystalline grid. So metals have this crystalline grid, so they're very tightly arranged. And every time they get a neutron, they move a little bit, so they get displaced. So usually ITER will have like 1 to 10 displacements per atom, which is already, you don't have to know the measurement, but you just have to say, okay, it's pretty high. So everything's going to be heavily bombarded by neutrons. But to go to demo, so to the next step into a fusion prototype, you're going from 10, which is already something that is really, really high, to 150, which is a factor of 15 higher. So IFMIF is going to test these materials. So what Commonwealth Fusion Systems did, they did something really smart, which was, okay, so this thing actually blows up our solid structure of the metal. So the metal is facing the plasma is bombarding the metal. So who says the metal has to be solid? It can just be something like the T1000 from Terminator 2. So there's actually a large research on liquid metal, so liquid plasma-facing components. So things that actually don't have to have a defined shape, and they can just heal themselves. And that's what they also did with the coil. So they have a layer of, I believe it's molten salts to protect the coil and part of the materials from the neutron fluxes for the Commonwealth fusion system. I really hope you manage to one day invite Bob Mumgard. He's an amazing scientist, and he's he's in the team of the Commonwealth fusion systems, and he's a great drinking buddy.
Wonderful. We'll have to look up Bob Mumgard, you said?
Yes.
Excellent. Good reference for later. We'll definitely look him up. So what it sounds like is that this, of course, making a successful fusion reactor, from what I understand, is something that we know is possible, but we don't know how to shrink it down. We don't know how to take it from something that would be definitely successful, like a 40 gigawatt reactor, that we couldn't possibly use all that energy unless we're simply producing syn fuels for 3/4 of it, and shrinking that down to like a 10 gigawatt or a 100 megawatt. That's where the challenge is, because as you said, it's the biggest thermal gradient, meaning it goes from extremely hot to extremely cold, like 130 degrees Kelvin above absolute zero. This is an extremely difficult thermal gradient, and then the magnetic or electrical confinement, and then the neutron problem. So 7 different just engineering destroying problems that ITER and all these related projects are trying to solve. Are you hopeful that we can rely on fusion to solve climate change, or do we need to do something else?
I don't think. I mean, to be this is probably going to annoy a lot of people, but okay. I don't think fusion will be here on time, because it is a really demanding task, and again, as a huge bureaucratic problem. So every time you want to do something in the ITER is greatly delayed. ITER has been over 3 director generals. Sadly, the latest director general, Bernard Bigot, passed away recently, and ITER has a very troubled story since day one. So ITER actually, just as a side note, actually started as an idea between the USSR and the United States. And both Reagan and Gorbachev had close scientific advisors that were, so the physicist from the Soviet part was actually friends with the physicist from the US part. There has always been this amazing world collaboration in fusion, which went above nationality. So it was just physicists trying to do cool stuff. So both Gorbachev and Reagan had somebody at their ear that they trusted, and they wanted to make, okay, we can't do this by ourselves. This is going to be expensive. But above all, we don't have the necessary manpower. Each nation does not have the necessary manpower. So we're going to try and do something together. And both Gorbachev and Reagan agreed and said, oh, this is awesome. This is based, as the kids say today. And so they started to draw it in the 80s. When ITER finally hit the ground, so when they start the building part, it was actually already 2001 or 2002, I believe. So it was just 15 years to decide the site, which actually is in the southern part of France. And it started really, really bad, because you had to negotiate with all the nations involved who was going to be the director general. And the first director general was a Japanese gentleman, which was an utmost bureaucrat. And it took from the early 2000s until 2013, I believe, when sadly the director general just passed away, Bernard Bigot. So that's when the project actually started to move. And that's when it was moving, but that's when it was, people started to believe that this is going somewhere finally. but it already started when people started to trust the project. It already had a considerable delay, and that's at least that's the view from the inside when I was there. So ITER has really stepped up the pace. It's going nicely now. It's finally it's trying to overcome its communications problem. So it's finally opened the media accounts on Twitter and on Instagram, I believe. So that's important. Communication is really important in science. And it finally started to take itself seriously, because most researchers said, okay, we're just going to work and we're going to try and take a PhD out of this. But if you do a PhD and then you don't ensure that the person you just trained is going to keep up on the project, and you just basically you're losing manpower, you're bleeding manpower. So fusion is extremely bureaucratic, has that problem. So it also has the added bonus, the challenge bonus, which is nobody has done this before. So we are, and it seems like something really trivial, but fusion experiments have come a long way since the 50s. So in fusion has been known since the 1920s. It's actually an older phenomenon than fission is. Fission was only discovered in 1938. Fusion was discovered around the early 20s by Arthur Eddington by observing the spectra of the sun. Finally, in the 50s, the first fusion device was built in the US by Lyman Spitzer. So he built a stellarator on his workbench. But building a stellarator, which is a very complex, like Mobius strip, so it folds on itself and then you try to connect it again. So it's a Mobius strip shaped plasma. So in order to build the magnets for it to be efficient, with the techniques you had in the 50s, it was like building a Swiss clock with just a rock. So you didn't have the techniques at the time. So we actually, stellarators are actually very interesting machines, unlike tokamaks. Tokamaks are just like the brute force Soviet approach, but they work. Stellarators only became serious in the late 90s due to computer-assisted design techniques. So you actually needed, so you had fission plants. For instance, the Chicago Pile one is from 1942 and it worked. And again, you needed a lot of revolution. So you needed the internet so you can share plans. You needed graphical cards so you can do CAD, advanced CAD, so you can align all the pieces. You needed very precise machining to build, because at the same time, I mean, let's be honest, a fission reactor is basically just a kettle. It's an oversized kettle where you put uranium and you make the uranium reacts by itself. But to make a fusion device, you need to overcome the electromagnetic barrier of the repulsion, because every atom is positive. So you need to eat it up a lot and confine it so it doesn't touch the wall. If it touches the wall, it cools down and breaks everything up. I'm rambling, but this is like the topic.
This is great. But to sort of summarize this,
yes.
It's an enormous challenge. It is just so complex. And while fission was shockingly simple, the ability to produce a completely perfectly reliable fission reactor is a big effort in itself. And we eventually have achieved that. We now have reactors that have billions of operational hours expected before they have any kind of a safety failure. And it turns out that almost every safety failure we've ever had has directly related to human negligence. Exactly. And yet we're starting to overcome that. We're going past it, both in operational culture and in the mechanics of the plants themselves, that they're just so hard to break at this point. How do we communicate that to the public, and what is nuclear advocacy like in your part of the world?
Okay, so it's pretty bad. So it's there's like everywhere else, there's a very deep historical there's a deep history in this. So it started actually in Portugal. It started just after World War II. So the nuclear studies. So Portugal is actually a founding member of NATO, and Portugal had a very close relation with President Eisenhower, I believe, at the time, just like in the early 50s. So the problem was Portugal and Spain, they were both living under a dictatorship. So fusion power is, so all of the all of the nuclear industry, because at the time we are actually the third largest country in uranium production in the world. We have a lot of uranium in our ground, so much so that you can actually look for the hotspots in lung cancer because of radon. There we have some serious thorium and uranium deposits. And so it was from the early 50s, everybody was like, we should get into this nuclear business. So this guarantees autonomy, independence, which is kind of like the signature textbook of very, very fascist regimes. So it's like independence above all. And so it's been tagged since day one by especially left-wing parties, which is like a relic of the old days of fascism. So there is this thing. So we had in Portugal, since the early days of the 50s, since around 54, we had a nuclear junta, as we call it. So a state-owned body to regulate and oversee nuclear developments. But the thing is, the decision to build a power plant locally was always postponed. So it was we never did it in Portugal, but they did it in Spain. And Spain has a really vibrant, even today. So they have a really vibrant nuclear industry. They're one of the best in the world at what they do. They have 6 PWRs in one. So 6 light water. They have 7 light water reactors, but they have 6 PWRs in one BWR. So one boiling water, 6 pressurized water. Mm-hmm. And they've been having a lot of issues all their time since early on, because all the nuclear projects also started with the dictatorship. Then they transitioned into democracy in the early 80s. We did it in 74. And so we had a lot of power plant projects planned, which were all discarded. We don't have any power plants in Portugal, but in Spain, they had a lot of plants, and they actually had, I think, they managed to have 10 reactors working. And then at some point during the early 80s, they had 2 Westinghouses in the north of the country and ready to go. But the separatist movement of that region kidnapped the plant's main engineer, and they kidnapped him. They had him hostage for a week, and then at the end, they assassinated the poor guy. So it's been really violent in Spain. Not happy with that, they also assassinated the replacement. So Spain had huge plans for PWR. So they had another 10 going, I think, but they were canceled, or they were like 70% completed. And here comes a very interesting link that actually is also part of my life, which is agriculture. So everybody most of my father's side of the family is in agriculture. And in a very hot summer day, which was like 100 Fahrenheit, I decided, man, screw this, I'm going to study physics. So I'm going to be in an air-conditioned lab. And to this day, and since I've been introduced to ecomodernism, there is this link between agriculture and power. So it's power to the people via food and power to the grid via electricity. And to this day, the one of the largest allies, I believe, in Spain for the nuclear power plant are the farmers. So the farmers actually want to restart abandoned plants that Spain has. So I think there's a very cool link, especially in ecomodernism, between agriculture and nuclear activism, and that could be that's an interesting link.
That is. What's the? I guess this is a little bit off topic. Do you know anything about what the local feeling about GMO crops and modern agriculture is.
Yes, I know because I've been following my father's struggles and my brother. So my brother and my father made wine, my brother makes wine, everybody and their family made wine, and they know that there's something. It's although it's a very sturdy vineyards are very sturdy. I mean, they're not totally. They feel the heat, so they are doing a lot of research, especially in heat resistant vineyards. I mean, they're reading upon it, and they're not researchers. I mean, but the funny thing is, you start to see, especially in agriculture, the need for cheap electricity, because they already have the diesel problem going these days. So diesel is going through the roof, and you see, especially the agriculture, the people in agriculture and the people in intensive electricity, like ceramics and stuff, and some other industry segments, advocating for nuclear power. So especially in the last couple of months after the invasion of Ukraine. So the thing about GMOs locally is that Europe has this nonsense view of organic agriculture. They're forcing organic agriculture everywhere, even though, like, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. So land intensive, water intensive.
Really?
And we're going through a really severe drought. So usually Portugal started with a lot of hydropower, and you can see the hydropower go down year after year. So the droughts are becoming more severe. Agriculture is taking a big hit, and you see that the need for GMOs for especially heat-resistant crops. So maize and other I can't remember any of them. Sorry, because. My father, if my father was there, he would be angry at me. But the GMOs have been also, like, they've been vilified to the infinity.
Yeah,
especially glyphosate. I'm not sure if you know what glyphosate is.
It's the Roundup chemical, of course, and so there's this very strange. There is a practical relationship between glyphosate and a GMO product called the Roundup Ready crop, a Roundup Ready wheat, and that means that those crops are resistant to the poison in glyphosate, whereas weeds are very susceptible to it, of course. So the alternative is that you would have, you could have organic fertilizers and organic pesticides that are much more damaging to human beings than glyphosate, but they would be considered organic.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very, I think it's a very nice alliance to have in the near future. So agriculture and nuclear advocacy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They both want to give power to the people.
Our friend Sandy on YouTube is asking, well, what about insects? What is glyphosate? What has it done to the insect population? And are organic fertilizers and pesticides better for insects than the Roundup?
I'm more of a fusion guy myself. I'm not the agricultural link. That's a very interesting question. And
Roundup is basically harmless to insects. It's when you're killing weeds that various insects are dependent on, that's where you get the problem. Roundup is a very innocuous chemical. Glyphosate has no real effect on human beings and animals. I think the only organisms that it affects strongly are aquatic invertebrates. The old Monsanto salesmen, they used to drink it to prove that it was safe. It's basically harmless to humans. And I don't think there's any major agricultural government organization in the world that believes Roundup is harmful. Personally, I use it all the time. I always have a bottle of Roundup in my garden shed, and same with BT. I use it regularly, and have for many decades. But I'm against these Roundup resistant crops. There's Roundup resistant corn and Roundup resistant wheat. It's sort of, and I can't imagine anybody buying it, using Roundup resistant products because they have a weed problem that they can't get rid of some other way. I mean, if you got a weed field that is, a wheat field that is infested with weeds, Roundup is not going to solve your problem. Right. I tell people about. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, I great topic, and thanks for the contribution, Tim. But I think we will absolutely set something up with our friend Sandy here. Tim, maybe you would like to talk with Sandy about agriculture, because if our friend at Environmental Coffee House, if you didn't see last week's episode, Tim told us all about the preservation of some of these ecosystems on the California coast, and so he's definitely familiar with like the rat poison story. Absolutely wonderful episode for anyone to check out if we want to get into the real question of biodiversity. So yeah, maybe another day we'll set that up. But I think I want to steer us
here again. I can relate all of those things to nuclear.
Right.
The amount. Okay, so I was just about to tell you about in wheat fields. They have these things called sponge booms, and it's a tractor with these big wings sticking out the back, and the underside of these wings are sponges, and they got Roundup in the sponges. And so the deal, they'll plant wheat, and the weeds will come up faster than the wheat. And so they can drive this tractor across the field real fast, and the weeds that they're sticking up farther than the wheat get a little dose of Roundup because they rub against the sponge, and the wheats below that doesn't touch it. And it's kind of a gelatinous mixture. And so I tell people about this, and they've never heard of it. And I said, well, it's kind of like nuclear. You can't describe nuclear waste. And then even if you can, you're not telling me how much there is getting used. I mean, when they use a sponge boom, they'll go out there and use a minuscule amount of stuff. I mean, the amount of material that gets rubbed on that weed is so tiny. It's sort of analogous to the amount of actual poison in the rats and the rat bait out on the Farallones Islands. And it's kind of analogous to the amount of nuclear waste we have compared to the amount of coal ash waste we have. The state of activism, and I see that's up here on the title. I mean, one of the things we got to do is get these people to. A friend of mine, Billy Gogish, we all know him. He uses the word enumerate a lot. These people are just enumerate. They don't understand simple numbers, whether it's rat bait, whether it's fusion energy, fission energy, or Roundup.
And
no understanding of the relative numbers.
So let me take the reins a little bit, and I agree in some way is that being a physicist, Luis, you must also agree that education is fundamental to understanding why these technologies make a better modern life. And the question though politically is, how do you build the relationship with more and more people so that they see the solutions that you are working towards? And that is, we begin to trust one another as people, and then we sit down and talk like this. We absolutely need to build more bridges. And as Luis was describing, the early anti-nuclearism grew out of anti-fascist action. Those were actions that were against the solidification of state power. They wanted more distributed ability to be self-sufficient or the ability to have international cooperation. And that's where I think maybe we could talk about the opportunities in the politics of Spain and Portugal. Are there more internationalists now, and do they understand the great value that we have in things like the IAEA, the strength of Portugal's uranium exports, meaning Portugal is party to all of these anti-weapons treaties, and so if the U.S. imports that uranium, we can't use it for bombs. Russia,
Yes.
they can't use it for bombs. We should be asking Portugal to export as much uranium as possible, because the countries that use that material will have to verify that they're not using it for a weapons program.
Well, Australia is the #3 exporter of uranium to the world, I believe,
Right.
and the #1 exporter of coal. And they have very, very strict regulations against using their uranium, for anything but energy.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about.
I'd like to hear. I'd like to hear a little bit from Luis about the his home area.
So unfortunately, there's a moratorium on mining uranium over here, so it's forbidden to mine uranium. So it's if all of these things became practice in the 80s, I believe. So after the fall of the fascist states, we were the democratic states, especially in Spain. So Spain was like I said, was almost with turning the keys onto Westinghouse's PWRs. And their government in 1983 basically just said, no more nuclear. It has to stop. So the democratic states just basically overnight stopped everything and every construction. So in Portugal here, it's very famous in our own history. There was this location which was already selected to install a PWR, so like a 1 gigawatt PWR, and they basically, the population, they had a document saying this is going to kill everybody with cancer. So this is going to cause a lot of cancers. It's going to pollute everything. It's going to kill everything in I don't know how many mile radius. And it got a lot of traction because there was a very famous scholar, so very famous professor, who actually gave credibility to these claims. So there was this, you have to know, this Portugal was basically a feudal state in the 70s, so we were very underdeveloped. And there comes this professor, which studied in the United States. So he studied mechanical engineering. He's a full professor. He's already a public figure. And he became the face of anti-nuclearism in Portugal. He already passed away, so I'm not going to dunk on him anymore. But to the day that he died in 2014, he was a climate change denier. So he did not believe that. Well, at least anthropogenic climate change. He did not believe that it was carbon emissions by humans that were causing climate change. So that's the level. So and then you can go on records to everything he said, and you see that most of the things he's saying is blatant lies. So the anti-nuclear movement started with blatant lies, and like you said, the way to turn this around is slow, steady, respectfully, and trying to engage people always with the best information and always with calm. And I actually was really happy when one of the chapters in Portugal of Fridays for Future asked me to talk with them about nuclear. And I think I actually managed to, not convince, but I at least leave them curious to further investigations. That it's not the apocalyptic machine, or it's not the evil industry, the evil that people usually think to be. So slowly, steadily, respectfully, and with calm.
Does Portugal have other mining, and I believe Portugal has had some problems with colonialism and mining there.
Yes.
Does mining have an evil connotation to it that just kind of goes over to uranium?
It does. So yeah. So the Portugal's colonial past is very troubled. It's still ongoing. I hope one day we can overcome it. But the thing is, but you're right. So after World War II, the mining, if you take into account all the colonies, Portugal was like a powerhouse in mining, especially with Angola and Mozambique. So it was, so uranium is basically just the maximum exponent. So during World War II, we were one of the main providers of tungsten to the UK. So tungsten, yeah. So we have huge reserves of tungsten, and we provided the UK with a lot of tungsten.
But it was also an environmental disaster in one very particular region, if I remember correctly.
Yes. So it was actually in how they call it, was actually in mainland Portugal. So the metropolis, it was actually in the metropolis, like they called it in the. You always see tungsten from the metropolis, or some pamphlets like this saying we were actually neutral during World War II, but we were providing but we were providing it. The mining activities are still being cleaned up, if I understand. So, but yeah, there's it's an evil connotation with mining, except with lithium. So since lithium is associated with the Green Revolution, and we have also lots of lithium in mainland Portugal. So lithium is fine. So yeah, just have it.
But, hey, no true Scotsman, huh?
Yeah, exactly. But the numbers are controversial because nobody agrees on the exact concentrations of lithium we have. And I'm not an expert, but there are, which I hope is going to be the next topic, which is Replanet. There are some members of Replanet Portugal which are mining PhDs, so they know what we talk about this a lot.
Wonderful. Yeah. Why don't you? So, Replanet, I understand, is like a version of an eco-modernist society. Why don't you just give us a brief overview of how it was created and where the chapters for Replanet exist?
So there are chapters. Legally in Portugal we still don't have it because there's a lot of paperwork, but we are planning on opening very soon. So yes, it is kind of like it is an eco-modernist movement in Europe, and basically the people that created it are, if you look at the Decouple podcast, it's like every European that has ever been there, that's how the meetings look like. So you have really heavy hitters on the eco-modernist part that decided to come together and join forces. So for instance, in France, you had the Voix du Nucléaire by Mirto and Tripathi. I'm not sure if you know the name. So, and they joined with some other heavy hitters from Finland. So they were part of Tea Tormanen, which is part of the Green Party in Finland, which basically last week just they become pro-nuclear. So they are the first Green Party in Europe that became pro-nuclear. It's a huge hurdle to overcome, and I hope they set the example. And then like I said, you should follow Let's Replanet on Twitter. And we have chapters in Australia. So shout out to Tyrone, our own our own social media manager, and to the Netherlands with Joris and Jonis and Joris. Shout out to them as well, and a lot of people. And so in three of our main members, so Mark Linus, Rauli Partanen, and Joris van Dorp, they just launched a report on how Europe can get rid of fossil fuels from Russia. So like really going cold turkey on that one. And I hope, and I'm going to plug it here, I hope people can just look for Switch Off Putin, hashtag Switch Off Putin. And it's a really nice report about, for instance, diversify the LNG imports, doing an aggressive plan of refurbishing the French nuclear power plants, stopping the German shutdowns. Which, I mean, let's confess, it's not going to happen. They're going to have blackouts sooner that they're going to stop the phase outs. I know, I worked in Germany for a long time. When they set up their mine, it's set in stone. And other measurements are like installing heat pumps, developing, fast tracking the development of renewables, and so on. And it's funny because everybody says it's not real, it can't be done, that's what they said it in the first month. So in the last week, the European Union came up with its own plan, and I think they copy pasted some of the parts. So.
It's too hard to let go of Putin. I mean, I'm not one to bad talk doomerism too badly. I used to be a doomer before I got into nuclear, and while it's politically, geopolitically, I don't see any reason why. There's so many more resources out there. Even immediately, we should be able to cut off Putin. But that's the more geopolitics than
Yes,
than it.
yes.
But yeah, thanks so much for this great overview. I'd say we've got about 10 minutes left if we want to get into questions and really just let it go. So I see you're unmuted now, Gabe. Go ahead and chime in. You want to ask anything from Luis?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to ask him about since the war in the Ukraine. I know before the war started, there was a lot of governments that were kind of pro-gas in a way, and which is all Russian gas, I believe, pretty much. Has that sharply changed now as far as the attitude since the invasion occurred?
Well, not officially. Just a quick side note. Yes, it was mostly Russian, and so for instance, but the other part is Algiers and Nigeria. So those are the other two main providers to the European Union. Sorry, but yeah, you're right. So the public opinion, so the taxonomy soap opera, which is officially a soap opera, their position has not changed at all. So unfortunately, so Austria, Germany, Portugal, Denmark, and the Luxembourg are actively against putting nuclear in the taxonomy. Germany is for gas in the taxonomy, and then the other ones are against both gas and nuclear. And at least publicly, it has not changed. And then, like I usually say, nuclear and GMOs are the spectacle of cognitive dissonance. So it's like we should help you get politicians, especially here in Portugal, saying, we should help our European brothers as much as we can. What about financing their own infrastructure, like for nuclear and even gas? I mean, even gas in the short term to switch. For instance, Poland, if Poland switched overnight from coal to gas, it would just halve their emissions. So, I mean, I can understand that if you want to run gas until 2030, it's not a bad idea if it's to switch off coal, especially when it comes to particulate matter. So, yeah, I can see people supporting that, but no, it's off the table. We have to help them, but not like this. And then you tell them, no, but this is the thing that would help them the most. Yeah, well, tough luck. So no, not publicly.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be so easy in the short term to get rid of that gas from Russia. As like I kind of disagree with Carl over there. What do you think about that? Short term.
I mean, this is an error this is a mistake 20 years in the making. It's like you've been building and building this error. So it's a very deep-rooted error, which has started with, for instance, I was once called crazy when I said that Gerhard Schroeder, which is the old, so he was the chancellor before Merkel. So he's like the big boss of Germany before Angela Merkel. And he's always been a private friend of Putin. And he's now a Gazprom manager. And when I tell people that, don't you find it weird that the guy
definitely
that the Gazprom manager is the guy that's against nuclear, and he's also the guy that's pro renewables all the time? Pro 100%.
He's a major player and a major problem. Exactly. He has a global negative influence. He's just, I totally agree. He's one of the main problems here.
I remember last August I was discussing, oh man, gas is going to take a hit. I even wrote an article on a magazine over here about that, and people were saying, come on, it's going to be fine. Gas is like $3 the megawatt hour. They have negative gas prices, and it's like, but don't you think that's weird? Can the market work like that? It's going to be fine. But all the gas is coming from Russia. It's Putin over there.
How is the price of anhydrous ammonia fertilizer?
Oh, it's through the roof. It's through the roof.
Okay, so
I've been
people
listening.
are going to be starving because of lack of Russian gas. That's just it.
Exactly.
And
All over the world,
Ukrainian
people
wheat
are-
as well. And
Ukrainian wheat.
Ukrainian
they
wheat.
fertilize that
also.
wheat with Russian gas.
Yeah, but they can't even get it out. They can't even get it out. They can't export it.
And it's rotting. It's starting
Yes,
to rot.
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
they're sunflower seeds. The farmers are not even going to grow them because they know they're not going to be able to ship them. I mean, even if the problem was solved today, we're shot for the season. Maybe, I don't know.
And the funny thing is, so like I said, I come from a very rural town. Most of the people I've been to in high school, they're in agriculture. And the thing they're saying is, well, the price for fertilizer is not as expensive as it could be because some people are basically just not planting. So the demand is not the same. So that's
They're
why
not
it's
going to starve.
Sorry?
They're not going to starve. I mean, they're going to make enough food for domestic use, but if they can't ship it, they're not going to plant it. And so we're shot for a whole nother season. It's just, there's going to be a world disaster as far as fertilizer and food goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Great. So we're wrapping up to final statements, and so I want to sort of review. Like we're building this activism to support a greater public understanding of science, and as well to discover these political interconnections that we really need in order to get our modern way of life out to everyone on Earth. We need to eliminate poverty, we need to provide energy for all, and we need the modern agriculture to do it. That's the way we solve the problems of societal collapse, of energy, intensification, of climate change, and it's all of these things have to come together. So what are the next steps? Anyone who wants to be involved in European activism, Luis, take it away.
So in my opinion, the best way is to contact somebody at Tree Planet, because we have a lot of smart people in there. Do you know that saying that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room? You're never in the right room with Replanet. You're always in the right room with Replanet. Sorry, that came out. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of interesting people there with a lot of expertise, with a lot of different fields. Find out Replanet wherever you are in Europe. Find out Replanet on social media. Interact with us, and join us in trying to build the future everybody wants.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.